Now you tell me your story. What's a dazzling urbanite like you doing in a rustic setting like this?
If you really must pry.
Oh, I must. I must.
Well, back in '56, my folks and I were part of this long wagon train moving west. Well, not exactly part of it. You might say we was bringing up the rear, when suddenly, from out of the west, came the entire Sioux Nation. And let me tell you, baby, they was open for business. Naturally, the white folks didn't let us travel in their circle, so we made our own.
Euphrates. No, seid nicht mehr Sugar. Laws im Gain! Kappa walk, it's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be gesehen. Take off. Hast du gesehen in deiner Leben? They darker than us. Woof!
And the rest is history.
The credence given to the identity of their identification as Jews and, more particularly, as descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, is, at present, quite insecure. Indeed, it has been removed from most serious discussions of either people and has become a source of bitter humor, most pointedly in Mel Brooks' 1974 film Blazing Saddles. As Mel Brooks' film illustrates, however, it is a kind of knowledge that can be articulated in the form of comedy, in the supposedly unspeakable images. Friedman 1991, that unresolved ethnicity has evoked. Using a satire on the Jewish Indian theory, Blazing Saddles provides its viewers with a postmodern glimpse of a culture that is simultaneously modern and traditional, colonial and post-colonial, national and fragmented, with peoples who are mainstream and marginalized, a pastiche, a collage. The entire film, observed Lester D. Friedman, 1982, 227, reverberates with the Jewish sense of alienation that led Brooks to focus on the problems faced by outsiders in the Old West, segregated by race, color, religion. In a memorable scene, Brooks essayed a complex variant on what Herbert Marcuse once called the desublimation of repression, presenting a band of Indians, whose chief is portrayed by Brooks himself in red face, speaking Yiddish to one another. Compounding this send-up of the Jewish Indian theory, Brooks' Indian parodies what is, in fact, the common epithet used when American Jews talk among themselves about American blacks. Schwarzers. His Indian inquires incredulously as he and his men come upon wagonload of African Americans being transported across the plains. In effect, once having been ensconced in Blazing Saddles' postmodern comic frame, the debate over whether the Jewish Indian theory has any validity has entered the realm of what Jean-François Lyotard called the differend. Mel Brooks' postmodern placement of the lost tribes of Israel in Hollywood's American West turned mystic history into a mundane farce.
Come look. I can't believe what I found. Come on, I cannot believe it. Whoa. Whoa. Brothers, I cannot believe this.
Looks like it's been there for hundreds of years.
This has been there for hundreds of years. Hundreds. Come look. Oh my goodness.
All right.
Say,
Elder, you okay?
no.
You all right, Elder?
No, I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong. Look, this has been here for 500 years. See, that says Yahweh Yahweh Shai. Oh, God.
It's a great discovery.
Does this mean we gotta go join the bum camp?
No. We don't join the bum camp. That just means God is part of the tribe.
Yeah, Gad's part of the tribes.
All right. Kahala Yahweh, Bahashema Mashiach Yahweh Shai. Kahala Yahweh, Bahashema Mashiach Yahweh Shai. Kahala Yahweh, Bahashema Mashiach Yahweh Shai. Bahashem Rakak Wadash. We are nations of kings and priests.
Right.
I'm your brother Lazarus by my side.
Brother Ball.
We the cake unturned.
That's right.
We the cake unturned.
Right.
All right.
Okay, now, this is a 12 tribe sign from back in the day. You can't really see it, but I want you to listen. This is the part of the video where he's going to run down who Reuben is, who Gad is, who Asher is, who Naphtali is, and who Issachar is. Quite interesting. Check this out.
Reuben is a Seminole Indian. Gad is the North American Indians. Asher is the Brazilian Indians. Naphtali is the Argentinian Indians. Issachar is the Mexican Indians. Those are the real tribes of Israel, according to the scriptures.
You hear that? He said Reuben is the Seminole Indians. Gad is the North American Indians. Asher is the Brazilian Indians. Naphtali is the Argentina Indians. Issachar is the Mexican Indians. And these are the tribes, are the real tribes of Israel, according to the scriptures. That is amazing.
Damn it, unless you're father among the Puerto Ricans, if your father's a white man or gringo, then you ain't part of that nation. Damn right you ain't. You're Puerto Rican, you're a white man. But if you're of Indian descent, Negro descent, then you're a part of us, brother. The Bible said let the chaff and the wheat grow together. After a while, we're going to separate this. What are you going to do then? Huh? The Lord said Puerto Rican, the other tribe, would go out there and mingle with the devil. Bring children in the world for the devil. You think because your hair's straight and you got that little yellow color that you're better than we are now? Hell no. Everything comes from darkness. That's right. Light came out of darkness. That's right. What's the matter with you people? Huh? What's the matter with you? Yeah, I'm light. I'm better than you. That's a damn lie. If you so-called yellow people, and you got your father a white man, and you so much better than we are, then get in there and whoop Mike Tyson. The strongest people in the world are the black people, man. You know that? When a white woman want her man, she don't go get the Puerto Rican there. She go looking for a black man. A strong man, brother. Yeah, she know what's happening. She know what to get. Yeah, you black men are the people. You act like I'm so scared. I'm inferior. You ain't inferior to no damn body. Nobody. The other tribes, the books ain't gonna raise the tents of Judah. Don't think Judah's the one paving the way around here. Where's all your ball players? All your fighters? Athletes? All of them is who? Black boys. Look at O.J. Simpson. Huh? So wait. coming whether you believe it or not. We had to go through hell before you kill Puerto Ricans, and who are the Spaniard Puerto Ricans?
Oh, this is it right
Read.
here. We voyaged.
We what?
We voyaged.
Read.
With 10 ships.
With what?
With 10 ships.
Read.
And we're at sea together for 2 years around Africa.
How many years?
2 years around Africa.
Around where?
Around Africa.
Give me a second, Ezra 13.
Ooh, that is powerful right there, boy. Because now what? What do they say? Second Ezra has nothing to do with Northern Kingdom on ships.
The year of the coon is over.
Right.
Done away with, man. And ain't nothing you gonna do about it. All y'all Negroites, all y'all Spicolites, it needs to end. We need to come together.
Right.
Honestly. It ain't carnal, man.
Right.
All right. Come on, go ahead.
All right. Second Ezra 13 and verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes.
Are the what?
The 10 tribes carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanessar, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them.
This was around 722 BC.
Right.
Read.
And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind.
Now, so from the top, they hadn't left it, but Ezra is saying we will begin. Remember, to mobilize millions of people does not take a day. You had to get what? You had to get ships. You had to get provisions for the ships. That took a lot of organizing. Many times we will read this and go, oh, it took a day. No. Imagine if millions of us were to get on ships to go somewhere. That's not a day's event. It might take a couple of years to organize everything properly, to make sure everything is right. This is what we're reading here. On to the next slide.
Read on.
That they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land.
Read.
And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river.
This is the H5104. It says a stream.
A what?
A stream, including the sea, especially the Nile and Euphrates.
And what?
And Euphrates.
And Euphrates. So it says he held still the flood, the river. If you in a boat, you wouldn't be worried about a flood. Anyway, you would. Exactly. You wouldn't want it to be held still, because if it's held still, then the boat will be stuck in mud. So it don't make no sense.
Read on.
That they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land.
Read.
And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river.
By the Red Sea. By the Red Sea. By the Red Sea. By the Red Sea.
I said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait. First of all, you're not going to speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
The Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river.
By the Red Sea.
I said, what was this? What year was this?
The Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river.
By the Red Sea.
He said it was in the 80s. Everybody was doing it.
The Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river.
By the Red Sea.
Of the river.
By the Red Sea.
For the Most High then shewed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. For though that country there was a great way to go.
How long?
Namely, of a year and a half.
A year and a half. Almost 2 years, brothers. Over the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established.
Moses lifted his staff over the sea, and a great wind came from heaven, blowing upon the sea, and the sea parted, leaving a dry path on the bottom of the sea floor. This was a most magnificent miracle. The children of Israel walked across the sea on dry ground.
The Jordan River stood between the Israelites and their promised land. But the same God who miraculously delivered them from the slavery of Egypt would once again make a way where there was no way. It is time for you to separate yourselves from the things of the world that hold you back from God, Joshua declared to the people of Israel. For tomorrow, the Lord will do amazing wonders before your eyes. As God had been with Moses when he parted the Red Sea 40 years earlier, the Lord promised he would also be with Joshua. Inspired by this confidence, Joshua explained the plan that God had given him. "Here's what we will do," Joshua announced. "As soon as you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the priests, follow after it." When the priests who carried the ark approached the raging waters, they did not hesitate to step in. They were not afraid of what they saw with their eyes, because their focus was on the promise God had made them. With courage and determination, they stepped in. And God performed the most amazing miracle. God held back the waters of the Jordan River. From the moment the priests took the first steps into the troubled waters, they miraculously stopped flowing. Far up the river, at the city of Adam, the water piled high as though it were splashing up against an invisible wall. As planned, the priests stood on dry ground in the middle of the river and waited until all the people of Israel passed by. When the last of them had crossed safely, the priests followed behind. And when they reached the other side, God released the waters back into the river canyon as they had been before. God proved to Israel that there was no sea deep enough to hold them back from his promises. It was important that his people always remember how mighty and powerful their God was, so that they would have the strength and courage to trust him in the future. So God had one representative from each of the 12 tribes of Israel collect stones from the riverbed to memorialize this great event. One by one, Joshua placed each stone in a pile as he acknowledged God's power and goodness. In the future, when their children and their children's children looked at these stones, they would remember how God separated them from a painful past, how he built their faith and trust in his strength, how he brought terror and confusion to their enemies, and most importantly of all,
Look, he has parted the river. It is a miracle.
How are we going to cross the river? It is running high today.
On dry ground.
Did you see that? The water stood up so they could pass.
Yeah, just like with Moses.
I wouldn't have missed this for anything.
I wish the prophets of Baal could have seen this.
What is it you would have me do for you?
Elijah then said to Elisha, "Now the Lord wants me to go to the Jordan River, but you must stay here." Elisha replied, "I swear by the living Lord and by your own life that I will never leave you." So the two of them walked on together. 50 prophets followed Elijah and Elisha from Jericho, then stood at a distance and watched as the two men walked towards the river. When they got there, Elijah took off his coat, then he rolled it up and struck the water with it. At once, a path opened up through the river, and the two of them walked across it on dry ground. After they had reached the other side, Elijah said, "Elisha, the Lord will soon take me away. What can I do for you before that happens?" Elisha answered, "Please, give me twice as much of your power as you give the other prophets, so I can be the one who takes your place as their leader." "It won't be easy," Elijah answered. "It can happen only if you see me as I am being taken away." Elijah and Elisha were walking along and talking, when suddenly there appeared between them a flaming chariot pulled by fiery horses. Right away, a strong wind took Elijah up into heaven. Elisha saw this and shouted, "Israel's cavalry and chariots have taken my master away!" After Elijah had gone, Elisha tore his clothes in sorrow. Elisha's coat had fallen off, so Elisha picked it up and walked back to the Jordan River. He struck the water with the coat and wondered, "Will the Lord perform miracles for me as he did for Elijah?" As soon as Elisha did this, a dry path opened up through the water, and he walked across. When the prophets from Jericho saw what happened, they said to each other, "Elisha now has Elijah's power." They walked over to him and bowed down.
One that had a brief but portentous effect on future events was presented in epistolary form to a Protestant divine on November 25, 1649, by the rabbinical leader of Amsterdam's Jewish community, Manasseh ben Israel. The letter, replying to the storm of curiosity that had arisen in England and the Netherlands over Manasseh's earlier recounting of the story brought to him by Aaron Levi de Montesinus, crypto-Jew, to the effect that one part of the remnants of the lost tribes of Reuben now dwell beyond the Cordillera Mountains in the interior of the Spanish colony of New Granada, Ecuador, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby, promised publication of the treatise in which the learned rabbi would handle of the first inhabitants of America, which I believe were of the 10 tribes, that they are scattered also in other countries, that they keep their true religion, as hoping to return again into the Holy Land in due time. Thus, in this letter is contained each of the elements of a historical hermeneutical intrusion. A disputed thesis of ancient Jewish history is offered not only as factual, but also as proved to be the proffered fact that at least one of the tribes had survived expulsion, global dispersion, and the travails of more than 2,000 years of exile with its culture and belief system still intact. Further, the prophetic promise of homeland return and redemptive reunification with both the other surviving Israelite remnants as well as the descendants of the people derived from the southern kingdom, in the diaspora since 70 CE, seemed about to be fulfilled in its 17th century appearance. The Jewish Indian theory, which would reappear in the 18th and 19th centuries, and have disparate effects on aspects of Jewish, Christian, and secular political thought and praxis, also provided the basis and the occasion for Manasseh ben Israel's bold attempt to reshape England's immigration policy. In force since 1290 CE, an English royal edict had banned Jews from its soil. Manasseh's version of the Jewish Indian theory thus became an unsuccessful instrument for bringing about the revocation of a centuries-old discriminatory statute. A feat the Amsterdam rabbi nearly accomplished by inserting both Jewish and Christian eschatology into Cromwell's secular national policy considerations. Manasseh's book-length version of the Lost Tribes history not only incorporated Montesino's Ecuadorian Indian thesis into the religious cosmology on the matter, but also took care to allow for a diasporic dispersion to have placed the several long-lost tribes in virtually every part of the world. Thus, after asserting that, "Do find no opinion more probable, nor agreeable to reason, than that of our Montesinus, who saith, that the first inhabitants of America, were the 10 tribes of the Israelites, who, as God would have it, hide themselves behind the mountains Cordillary." Manasseh went on to observe that, in his own disquisition on the subject, shall also shew, that as they were not driven out at once from their country, so also they were scattered into diverse provinces, into America, into Tartary, into China, into Media, to the Sabbatical River, and into Ethiopia. Their supposed dispersion over most of the earth was of crucial importance to Manasseh's twofold purpose: to divulge new proofs that biblical prophecy was being fulfilled, and to argue that only England's edict prohibiting Jewish immigration stood in the way of their biblically foretold global dispersion. Once completed, the worldwide Jewish diaspora would herald the beginning of the much-hoped-for Messianic era. Such English ministers of the gospel as Thomas Thorogood and John Dury took to embellishing their own view that the Indians of the Americas were Jews, making contact with Manasseh and adding their own belief that the Jewish Indians were divinely destined to receive the blessings of conversion to Judaism's successor religion, Christianity. Manasseh found the linchpin as the appropriate Christian, as well as Jewish, interpretation of a prophecy found in Daniel 12.7. When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. However, precisely because it was possible to translate the phrase scatter the power to breaking the power, Manasseh could not rest his case on the ambiguity contained in that biblical utterance. Hence, he turned to a verse in the book of Deuteronomy, 28.64, wherein it is written, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other." Seizing on this phrase and combining it with that of the prophecies in the book of Daniel, Manasseh contrived an argument that held that Cromwell's Puritan Republic was the land referred to by the Hebrew Deuteronomic term Kezeh-Haaretz, often translated into French as Angleterre, or the end of the earth, that is, England. As Manasseh presented the matter, now that Montezino had found Jews among the Indians of the New World, only the admission of Jews into England was necessary to fulfill He Lord's promise of a complete global Jewish dispersion, the people to the coming of the Messianic age. Manasseh had used his Jewish Indian thesis to request that Jews be readmitted to England not merely as alien settlers, but as a communally recognized people equal to others in English law. The Jewish Indian theory in America. Although the Jewish Indian theory proved neither necessary nor to effect Manasseh's immigration project, once having been enunciated it became sediments in the arcuna of lore about the Israelites. In the centuries since Manasseh's death, it has been revived intermittently, almost always in service to Jewish or Christian eschatological interest as well as mundane secular interests. Thus, in 1775, in the most well-known instance, James W. Adair, an 18th-century historian of the American Indians, put forward no fewer than 23 arguments in support of his claim that the Aborigines of Florida, with whom he had lived for several years, were descendants of the lost tribes and that, because of this, their territory ought to be wrestled from Catholic Spain and its anti-Jewish Inquisition by means of the Anglo-Indian Alliance. To evangelical Protestants, seeking concerts among the Indians, as Bernard W. Sheehan has pointed out, coupling the Indians with Jews yielded obvious theoretical advantages, because the European man had his spiritual origin in Israel, it would certainly improve the animalistic situation of the Indian to find historical beginnings there. However, biblical exegetes among the missionaries to New England worried over the contradictions that a close reading of the sacred literature seemed to suggest. Insistent on their belief in a Puritan variant of what is now known as flood ethnology, pious evangelist of colonial New England knew that the Indians could not be autochthonous to America, but were the descendants of the accursed son of Ham. Therefore, perhaps beyond salvation, or whether, as offspring of the long-lost tribes of Israel, they might be of a much sought-after millennium. Ingenious casuistries seeking to affirm or set aside a Jewish Indian genealogy were written and preached throughout the 17th century, some linking the American Aborigines to Scythians, others to Judeans, and still others seeking to give them either a Semitic origin or an absolution from the Hamitic curse. One paradigm initially proved to be attractive, designating the Indians as Canaanites, thus Hamitic in origin, Canaan being the patronym of the accursed son of Ham who was said to be the progenitor of the seafaring Phoenician people. L'Estrange's critique of the list tribes theory was no more original than was Thoralgod's case for it. L'Estrange relied heavily on an earlier 17th century work by another Anglican, Edward Brerewood, a pioneering figure in the fields of linguistics and astronomy. In the course of his posthumously published enquiries touching the diversity of languages and religion, Brerewood offered a series of forceful objections to the claim that vestiges of Mosaic culture existed among the Indians, and hence to the conclusion that the natives were Israelites. L'Estrange expanded upon Brerewood's criticism, which were directed primarily against Genebrardus, and applied them to Thoralgod. But unlike L'Estrange, whose interests were almost entirely polemical, Brerewood integrated his critique of the lost tribe theory into a positive argument. He held that the Israelites had never been dispersed beyond the Middle East, and that the Indians were descendants from the Tartars, a Central Asian people whom he and many other early Europeans equated with the ancient Scythians. The Tartar origin theory thus cast the Native Americans as prototypical barbarians, not as fallen Israelites. Manasseh faced a far greater challenge in tracking the movements of the lost tribes, whose history, as we shall see, was poorly documented and perhaps not documented at all. His analysis depended partly on the writings of Genebrardus and other Christian lost tribes theorists. Manasseh agreed with these authors that there were Israelites in America, and that there were clear examples of Mosaic culture among the Indians. However, he concluded that traditionalists had combined these points in the wrong manner. There had been two ancient migrations to the New World, one Israelite and the other Tartar. The natives were from the Tartars. They had borrowed aspects of the neighboring Israelites' culture. The lost tribes, for their part, remained both ethnically distinct and mindfully observant in the New World, and also in Ethiopia, Persia, China, and Tartary, and other places where he suspected they were living. In 1652, Thoralgod reprinted Use in America under the title Digitus Dei, and then be a new work which engaged more fully, the arguments of Brerewood, L'Estrange, and Manasseh. This second book, entitled Jews in America, was published in July 1660, 3 years after Manasseh's death and weeks before L'Estrange's. Hence, neither man wrote a reply. It was later reprinted as Vindicate Judiorum. Although remaining convinced that the Native Americans were Israelites, Thoralgod made one notable change in his overall argument. Use of America. He had seen Tartars as Gentiles, an assumption he shared with Brerewood, L'Estrange, and Manasseh. In Jews of America, he viewed the Tartars themselves as descendants of the lost tribes, amalgamating the Israelites, the Indians, and the Tartars into the same people. By the mid-17th century, lost tribes theorists had solved to their own satisfaction the exegetical problems in these scriptural and apocryphal texts. The river in Tu Estris was not the Euphrates but a tributary which flowed into it from the northeast. The harbor, the modern Nar al-Khabar, the outward journey from Assyria to Arzareth was to the north and east of the harbor, and Arzareth was Tartary. Tartary, as most early modern Western Europeans understood it, was an immense expanse which stretched from the Caspian, or even the Black Sea all the way to the present-day Bering Strait. The region included or even constituted the ancient Scythia, and for this reason, the Tartars were often seen as the heirs of the Scythians' reputation for barbarism. Earlier lost tribes theorists also speculated about the Israelites' route from Tartary to the New World. Although Genebrardus proposed a northwestern migration through Greenland and Labrador, the conventional wisdom sent the lost tribes all the way across Tartary and then through the ill-defined land or Strait of Anian, which was located on many early modern maps in the vicinity of the Bering Strait. The Anian route to the New World was also the itinerary of choice for advocates of Tartar origin view of the Indian ancestry. Thoralgod, Manasseh, and Brerewood agreed that Anian was the point of passage from Asia to America. They disagreed about whether Israelites and Tartars, or Tartars were the people doing the passing. The bar was set equally low on the Native American side. Because they never visited the New World, Thoralgud and Manasseh relied necessary on published sources for information about Indians, accounts of travel and exploration, progress reports by Catholic and Protestant missionaries, natural histories, and most important of all, the writings of earlier lost tribes theorists, who had not only mapped out the likely route to America, but also provided lists of similarities between Israelite and Indian culture. The two men were willing to countenance as Israelite any Native American belief or practice for which an analog could be found in the Mosaic tradition. They were not concerned with tracking cultural variations between native groups or with determining the extent to which a given custom was found in the New World. Thoralgud indiscriminately cited sources about Indians living at various locations between New France and Peru. Manasseh was somewhat more restrained, centering his attention on texts emanating from New Spain, the Caribbean, and Brazil. In Thoralgud's version of the Lost Tribes history, Tartary was not simply the geographical link between Assyria and America, but also the place where the process of Israelite degradation, already underway in Canaan, rapidly accelerated. As the former Scythia, Tartary was an appropriate site for cultural purgation. It provided Thoralgud with the obvious solution to the problem of explaining how the Israelites became so prodigiously rude and barbarous. Having assigned the blame to Tartary, he then had to decide if the lost 10 tribes became idolatrous benighted under Tartar influence, or if they simply became idolatrous and benighted Tartars. He endorsed the first alternative in the 1650 edition of his book. Here he sent all the into the New World, culturally impaired until the Eschaton by their exposure to the Tartars. But in the 1660 edition, he reversed field and made the Israelites, the Indians, and the Tartars into the same people. The full extent of Manasseh's revision of the conventional form of the Lost Tribes argument is now apparent. His Israelites passed through Tartary and reach America with their culture intact, not corrupt. The Lost Tribes were not the only inhabitants of the pre-Columbian New World, but rather a minority living in the midst of a Tartar population. The existence of Mosaic beliefs and practices among the Indians was evidence of Israelite influence, not proof of Israelite ancestry. Thoralgud has not read The Hope of Israel by the time he finished writing News in America. He secured a copy of the Latin edition of Manasseh's book shortly after its publication in Amsterdam, and in contrast to many of his English contemporaries, he recognized that Manasseh was arguing that the lost tribes and the Indians were separate peoples. Thoralgud conceded in Jews in America that Manasseh might be correct about the matter. However, he insisted that as things now stood, he still preferred the traditional version of the lost tribes theory to Manasseh's revision of it. Thoralgud's defense of the standard argument, however, received a sterner challenge from Brerewood and Ella Strange. Brerewood saw no inherent logic in the traditional form of the lost tribes theory. He wondered why the Indians retained certain aspects of the Mosaic law and repudiated others. Why, for instance, would they preserve levirate marriage and yet dine on carrion and lizards, keep circumcision and not the Sabbath? He demanded to know, moreover, why practices found in among the Native Americans were seen as Israelite, when those same practices existed among other people whom no one thought were the lost tribe.